played out pretty close to what I thought it was going to be. So something that I noticed in the first round is an issue that taller, slender fighters have when going up against a shorter, stockier pressure fighter that is also technical. I've had it in the gyms and in fights before where coming out, it's really, really difficult to deal with that technical fighter's range when they're pressuring you, not just in bursts, but consistently. It's very, very difficult to get your range and your timing down on your opponent. Not as difficult for that pressure fighter to do so versus you. The reason is because when you're going up against a shorter fighter as a taller, slender fighter, most of the time, if they haven't had an exorbitant amount of experience fighting taller fighters, it takes them some time to be able to get past your punches. Now, a technical fighter that has a consistent pressure, very, very quick pressure with no regard for you whatsoever is very, very difficult when it comes to being a taller, slender fighter. And it honestly comes down in that case to the confidence of that shorter fighter. And I saw that very, very early on, Isreal Adesanya was having a very difficult time dealing with that. And something coupled with that really lengthened the process of Isreal Adesanya being able to feel out Kelvin Gastelum is that Kelvin Gastelum hurt Isreal very, very early on. Now, if you've never fought before, it might look like when that person's recovered 30 seconds, 45 seconds later, they're never truly recovered. You're really not after being hurt like that, whether it's mentally, physically, cognizantly, you're not recovered. Something else I also noticed is that with Kelvin's pace and Kelvin's ridiculous ability to understand distancing and pause breaks in the action, that coupled with Isreal Adesanya being hurt very early on was very difficult for even one of the most technical strikers in the UFC to deal with. Now, something you may have never noticed throughout Kelvin Gastelum's career is that he's very, very good at manipulating space and time simultaneously. Something that Kelvin Gastelum does is he will come inside, strike, create a break in the action, and in a split second understand what you are coming with and knows whether or not it's safe to come back in that moment. He takes very, very small breaks in between combos and strikes and puts together 2 to 3 full different punch combinations in succession to what the naked eye would see as just one single punch combination. That coupled with the fact that Isreal Adesanya was trying to get the timing and the range down made the process for Isreal very, very difficult. Something that my boxing coach, my very first boxing coach, told me very early on is that when you slip or when you avoid a strike and you don't counter or make your opponent pay, that is a waste of an opportunity and you've done nothing to utilize that situation. Isreal Adesanya did that for the vast majority of this fight, and it was due to being hurt very early on. Daniel Cormier even pointed out early on that he's not fully committing to his punches. What that means is that when Isreal Adesanya is avoiding Kelvin Gastelum's pressure and striking back, it's better than Isreal just being on the back pedal and not giving anything in return, but it's still not the same as trying to effectively do ridiculous amounts of damage upon that counterattack. Now, as the fight progressed, and as you saw towards the end of the fight, that changed, but through the first, second, third, and even parts of the fourth round, Isreal Adesanya, when he was moving backwards from Kelvin's pressure, his goal was to avoid. His goal wasn't to make Kelvin pay as much as it can seem that way, or as much as he might have thought that it was that way. That was not what he was trying to do. It was very obvious to someone who's seen it before. He was trying to avoid Kelvin's pressure. Now, remember when I went back to telling you that the taller fighter has a very big issue against the shorter pressure, constant pressure fighter? As Kelvin's pace slowed, it did not slow necessarily right off the bat in his strikes, but something that I noticed starting around the third round is that Kelvin's pressure turned from a consistent pressure to more of a burst pressure. That allowed Isreal to be able to calculate a little bit more, take a little bit more time mentally to decide how he was going to strike, from what angle he was going to strike, and that's when you saw Isreal start to take over. even Kelvin changing from a constant pressure to a burst pressure was enough for Isreal to make the proper adjustments and get into his game a little bit more. Now, what started happening after Isreal started getting his timing down, started getting the range down, started picking up on Kelvin's consistent pattern, having pattern recognition of Kelvin's strikes, is that Isreal switched from trying to avoid while countering to just trying to counter. The avoiding the strikes comes into play there, especially with someone with Isreal Adesanya, who has some of the best head movement that I've ever seen in MMA. I mean, once again, my boxing coach taught me very early on that the best way to avoid a strike, the most effective way to avoid a strike, is to let it get as close to you as possible without it actually hitting you. That is how you not only deal the most damage to your opponent with your counter, but you also cause them to get the most energy sucked and taken out of them. Now, as that progressed and as that happened, Kelvin started getting caught coming in with very, very hard counters from Isreal, which made Kelvin not only stop coming forward, but go back to striking on the outside, which is Isreal's game. You're not going to beat him there. And after the progression of this fight happened, after the taller fighter, like I said, against the shorter fighter, as that fight goes on, the longer that fight goes on, that taller fighter actually adapts better to the pressure of the shorter fighter, and that advantage that the shorter technical pressure fighter had early on, it starts to sway to the taller, slender fighter. And you saw what happened. That fifth round was all Isreal Adesanya. Everything was coming together for him. His counterattacks were difficult. Not only was he standing his ground after his slips and after his rolls and hitting Kelvin with very, very hard strikes, he was following up after that and catching Kelvin going back on the back foot. And that ended up being all she wrote. I mean, Isreal could have finished Kelvin a couple of times with strikes, could have definitely finished him once when he decided to take the back and throw punches. He could have locked up a rear naked choke, I think, in that second, finish it. He could have locked up that triangle. He did have the triangle locked up, but according to Isreal Adesanya, he had issues with his knee, which made him not able to lock it in tight. Regardless, good fight by both parties. As the fight went on, like I thought in round one, if Isreal Adesanya didn't get cracked hard and finished, which he did not, it was going to play into his favor, and that fifth round was definitely the decision factor for the judges.